Hello, hello. So as the month of May has is coming somewhat to a close and the Indianapolis 500 is upon us, Alex, we're getting ready to go to the Brickyard to Speedway, Indiana for the 108th running of the Indianapolis 500. And I've had a bit of an issue because I'm telling people I'm going on this trip. I'm going to the Indy 500. And maybe they've heard of the Indy 500 before and they're like, "Oh, that's cool." But like I feel like the magnitude of where I'm going, where we're going, it's hard to explain the
Yeah.
magnitude of this race. Why it's called the greatest spectacle in racing, right?
And you will really learn even more
Yeah.
when you actually get there.
Yeah,
Like,
because I've never
I have
been.
such a deeper appreciation for Indianapolis Motor Speedway after going last year and now going this year. Like, back home again in Indiana, that is going to hit. But you're
Right.
right. When you're telling people who don't watch the Indy 500 or IndyCar racing in general, they're like, oh, okay, cool, have fun.
Yeah,
But
cool. Yeah,
they
I love
don't get it.
NASCAR. NASCAR's so cool. I went to a NASCAR race before. Like it's just so hard to explain. And so we want to have a little discussion on like why is the Indianapolis 500 the biggest race in the world, right? Because
Yeah.
it's kind of up for debate, right? People argue, is it Indy? Is it Le Mans? Is it any F1 race? Like what's the biggest race in the world? Um, and the actual reason why the Indianapolis 500 is the biggest, the most prestigious race is the history and the origins behind it, right? We'll get into it a little bit because the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, it was built in 1909 and it was kind of built as a bit of a proving ground for automobiles because automobiles they were just invented. So they were like, well, how can we test our these cars? So they had 500-mile races at the Brickyard, and that's kind of spiraled off into what it is today with Joseph Newgarden going 140 miles per hour down the front stretch, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it wasn't like the first race ever. There were some races in France like late 1800 and stuff, but in terms of like big prize pool, a huge like purpose built speedway, the Brickyard, the Indianapolis, it was one of the first major ones, and obviously throughout history it's the first one that stuck, right?
Yeah.
um but no one cares. Like, not not saying that no one cares, but if you tell that to somebody that doesn't care about racing, they're gonna be like, "Oh, okay.
They're
Is
going to
this guy gonna
stare
be
at
done
you with the
yapping yet?"
most blank stare. They're like, oh,
Right.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is true. Like, as racing fans, you have to respect that, right? Like, the only other event that can come close to this kind of level is the 24 Hours of Le Mans because it's had like 90 races. It's been happening for about 100 years as well. So you can compare them, but again, no one. It's hard to just be like, hey, this is the magic of Indy, and you just read off a Wikipedia page. Like no one's gonna care. So
Hmm.
I want to get into like why actually is Indy such a big deal in ways where normal people can understand it. Normal people, not racing fans. We're not normal, of course. And Alex, you definitely has got to experience some of this when you went to the Indy 500 for the first time in 2023. But there's such a respect for tradition at the Speedway,
Yeah.
which, and just about everything at the Speedway has some kind of tradition to the point where, and this kind of connects to the history because this race has been happening for a long time. There's generations and generations and generations of families that have been going to the Speedway, and these traditions are very respected, and it's a big deal about the whole experience, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I will say, when I got to the track last year and they launched the cannon right as the gates open, like, like I believe 6 a.m., they launch off the cannon. They do it every year. They've done it for a very,
Yeah.
very long time. That's a tradition. And when you hear that, the ground kind of shakes and it's just like, and everyone that's like walking to the gates, they start cheering, they're screaming. And you're just like in Speedway, Indiana. Like the Speedway isn't a neighborhood. And it's just like the town erupted in cheers. It's like it is race day. I'm getting chills just talking about it. Oh my
Oh,
god! And I cannot wait to experience that again. Like it sounds silly. Like, oh yeah, they launch a cannon at 6 a.m.
It's
and
like
yay, it's
someone
race
would
day.
ask, like, well,
But
why do they do that? Because it's tradition.
yes,
And that's important. That is so
and
important because we've been
it
doing this for
is
over 100 years. Like it's
because right. And when you're there, it's like they've been doing this for so long, and I'm here to experience
yes,
that. And that's just the cannon part. And you talk about, I mean, the race winner, they'll drink a glass of milk and
the
they have this whole
milk.
victory celebration.
Yes.
They have the wreath, they have all this stuff in there. And
Yeah.
it's just like you've seen legends go through that kind of moment. And last year, you watched Joseph Newgarden experience all that. And he's very
Yeah.
emotional because the greatest of the greats in racing did the exact same process that he's doing.
You can compare them almost. And even again,
Yeah.
back to the family part, well, some people are probably here saying, my great grandfather or my grandfather went to Indy every year and he got to hear the cannons as well. Stuff like that. And I
Yeah.
remember when we had Shannon on IndyCar Chick on our episode, I believe it was about 2 years ago at this point. I mean, she cries at Indy every year. Like the Speedway
Hmm.
makes you cry. I mean, it's to that much of an emotional
And
connection.
when we had her on, we asked her because your Twitter bio says that IMS makes you cry. Why? But now that I've gone, I get it because last year Joseph Newgarden, my favorite driver, won the race, and I cried. Like I get it.
Right.
I get it now.
Yeah.
It is a you just feel the history when you're in that facility. You look at the pagoda, you see it on TV, you see the size of this track, but in person it is so different. And you just have to respect Indianapolis. Like it
Well,
is another beast.
and I love how the sanctioning body of IndyCar has done a pretty good job of not changing major parts of the tradition. Because a lot of
Hmm.
times anything Indianapolis 500 related gets kind of compared to the Daytona 500, and we've seen Daytona Speed Weeks get kind of dismantled. There's no, I mean, there isn't a Speed Weeks anymore, essentially, but there's major parts about the Indy 500, like the no locked in spots. Everyone's fighting for those 33 spots. The Speedway does not owe you anything. There's still so much track time during the month of May. It's stuff that, as NASCAR fans, we wish Daytona still had some of that magic. Because, I mean,
Hmm.
Alex, we watch the Daytona every year and it doesn't feel the same as it did when we were
No.
kids. And I just feel like Indy has not lost that magic. It's,
And you said it, like the month of May is
yes.
Indianapolis. It is the Indy 500. You don't say that about February for NASCAR Daytona, and you don't necessarily have to, but
Yeah.
there's not a buildup. The race just kind of happens for the Daytona 500 at this point. For the Indy 500, there has been buildup for the entire month.
Mhm.
And they even test there in March or April, and like there's just such a buildup. And there are teams that only run this race, like
Yeah.
Dreyer and Reinbold. They only run the Indy 500. There are teams that just focus solely on this because of how big of a deal it is, and you don't really see that in NASCAR. Like you'll see some one-offs over there for the Daytona 500, but you don't see teams dedicated solely to like that, like they are for the Indy 500. And
Yeah.
I think that's just another thing that makes it so special.
I mean, I love how it's like we talk about this a lot with the Penske drivers. Like, sure, you can be a Penske driver, you can win championships, IndyCar championships, but you got to perform at the Speedway. It's like
Yeah.
it's bigger than the series itself, and
Yeah. I
for good
mean,
reason.
I'll keep going back to Joseph Newgarden. Last year, when he won the 500, he said finally when he finally won
Yeah.
the race. And for a lot of people, you're not really seen as like you don't really have a complete resume in IndyCar or your racing career unless you have an Indy 500 win on your resume.
Yeah. It's that big of a deal. Because I mean, again, that's what it's in the name of the series, IndyCar, right? Um,
Yep.
but I mean, most of us already know how big the Indy 500 is compared to the rest of the series. We're not here to talk about that, um, but actually, we kind of are here to talk about that because the magnitude of Indy is just it's huge, right? It's a huge deal. Speedway, Indiana. I mean, the track is its own zip code, right? Am I understand? Like, it's called Speedway, Indiana. Like, it's
I
its
mean,
own
it's a
little.
town. It's
It's
a
a
tiny
town.
little neighborhood town. Yeah.
I mean, so it's got its own zip
Suburb of
code.
Indianapolis.
That's
Yeah.
so that's so cool. Um, and just other things that make it like so like I guess the spectacle part of the greatest spectacle in racing. This is the fastest racing in the world. Circuit racing, I guess. Yeah, drag racing is faster. Whatever. But like this is fastest circuit racing in the world. These guys are going so fast, and again, you talk about that
200. They're hitting like 240 in
240.
qualifying.
Yeah, they're topping out at
And they're
240. That's
averaging
insane.
around like 233 ish in qualifying. Like that
I
is remarkable. You don't see that anywhere else.
I love how like they use the average speed, like miles per hour, instead of lap time. I love
It's so
that
cool.
because
Yeah.
it's like it really does make a difference.
Makes it more unique too.
Yeah, exactly. It's another little thing about Indy that's different. Um, and it still kind of has that spirit of this track was built to test automobiles. Well, we're still kind of doing that today with especially like with qualifying. And you talked about the build up to Indy. Part of that is the whole weekend that is dedicated to qualifying, and they turn up the boost, which is just so cool. They turn up the boost, like, yeah, let's go even faster. And they push the limits of these cars. They try to trim it out as much as possible, but you still have to keep it wide open without the downforce. And it's literally just cars making laps all by themselves, and somehow it's almost just as exciting as the race, maybe even more exciting. Like,
Mhm.
but it's just qualifying.
Yeah.
Like, and again, kind of back to comparing it to the Daytona 500. NASCAR fans wish, Daytona had a unique qualifying format for years and years and years with, single car qualifying and then the duels. But it's just not the same anymore because, there's
Yeah.
no the charters and there's no go or go homers and, the cars are just literally just have so much downforce.
Even this year, for this year's Indy 500, there's only 34 cars, and you get 33 cars in the actual race. Only one person goes home, but it is still such a spectacle to watch it because it's one person will miss the biggest race in the world, and you don't want to do that. It's just, and last year, Graham Rahal missed it. That was a big story because that's not like a small team. Like that's one of the bigger teams IndyCar is a big name in the series. And anyone, as you said earlier, can miss this race.
Yeah, Fernando Alonso in 2019. That was probably one of the biggest. James Hinchcliffe missed it one year. With he was a full-time guy. I mean, the full-time teams can miss the 500, which is just something so special about it. And just
this year, Marcus Ericsson's at risk. I'm recording this before qualifying for this year's Indy 500, the final day. But Marcus Ericsson won it 2 years ago. Nearly won it last year. Was runner-up. He's at risk. As of recording this, like he's at risk of missing the race.
And Graham Rahal's for the second year in a row at risk of missing it. The 15 team is at risk of missing it, and it's Indy. And Graham said it himself in the interview, or someone. I mean, they say this all the time. Indy doesn't owe you anything. This racetrack, that's just how Indy is, right? I heard that a lot yesterday. That's just how it is. I mean, sometimes it's your day, sometimes it's not, and yeah, I mean, again, there's a reason they spend a whole weekend to qualify, and there's a reason people are glued to their TV watching it for 7 hours on a Saturday, right?
Yeah.
It's so cool. You can't make me watch a qualifying session like that for any other sport or any other motorsport. And our last major point is kind of the crossover power, because if this is such a big deal, this is the biggest race in the world, then certainly drivers from all over the world who don't race in the series, don't race in the IndyCar series, they want to give a crack at the Indy 500. And there's a rich history of that happening. I mean, back in the day, the Indy 500 used to pay points in the F1 championship, right? Which, weird, but whatever. And more recent examples of NASCAR drivers, doing either what's, the double, like Tony Stewart, Robbie Gordon, Kurt Busch, this year Kyle Larson, Fernando Alonso, who was very into F1 at the time, kind of experimenting with Indy. He ran in 2017. As I mentioned, he missed the show in 2019. We saw Juan Pablo Montoya, not only has he been in the 500, but he's actually won the 500, right? and Montoya, I learned him. I discovered him from NASCAR, of course, when I was a kid. But if you look into the history, he's done Formula One. He's done basically everything, right?
Yeah.
And winning the Indy 500 is one of those things, and it's just like his resume is so stacked, and that's it's something that other big races I think can do, like the Rolex and the 24 Hours of Le Mans. They're a bit of an all-star of motorsports, right? You see the biggest drivers in the world come to one place and they're all trying to win the race. Indy, I wouldn't say it has it to that extent because naturally there's less
Yeah.
drivers. It's not an endurance race, but I mean, it's there. You see Kyle Larson this year. I mean, he wants to try Indy. It's a big
Yeah.
deal. I wish there were more like F1 drivers that were able to maybe try and do this, maybe one day, but
Right.
yeah. And that I didn't even mention, Mario Andretti and everything he did,
That's what I was just gonna say. Like Mario
Yeah.
Andretti, AJ Foyt, like
Yeah.
major names in motorsport. They've all had success at Indianapolis.
Yeah. It's cool. Yeah. And again, I just hope I hope that little feature, this crossover power, I hope it grows more because I think we've been lacking it a little bit,
Mhm.
like just at least in my lifetime. But I mean, it's
Right.
cool. Yeah.
Well,
So yeah.
let's kind of wrap up here and talk about our personal favorite memories of the Indy 500 as we go into another one this next weekend.
Yeah.
And Zach, you kind of talked about yours a bit. You can talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, so let me just talk because I feel like my first actual Indy 500 that I watched was 2011, which I was 11 years old. Because again, I was only really paying attention to NASCAR when I was a kid. I knew what Indy was, kind of. I just wasn't very interested in it until 2011. You know why I was watching 2011? Danica.
Why?
That's why.
Oh,
Danica did so much to get NASCAR fans interested in IndyCar, I feel like. Because
yeah.
that's what happened to me. I was actually starting to pay attention to IndyCar a little bit. And 2011, I watched it, and oh my God, what a race. What a race for me. What a race for it to be your first Indy 500.
No kidding. Yeah.
Because obviously, if you J.R. Hildebrand, he hits the wall off turn 4, and Dan Weldon comes and steals the victory. And I didn't even know the magnitude of Dan Weldon winning that, what that meant at the time. But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, wow, like that was crazy. That was insane. And then 2012. I remember 2012 and 2013. I saw the finish, or I watched the race. I saw the finishes. You know what I was saying?
What?
IndyCar needs green white checkers. That's what I was saying.
Boo.
Why are they ending under caution? That's so lame.
Spoken like a true NASCAR fan.
Now they throw 3 red flags in the last 10 laps.
Yeah.
But and then I think this is probably my favorite memory of watching the 500 in 2015. I was watching it with my dad, and watching it. We were very engaged. And my dad didn't only watch IndyCar either, but it's the Indy 500. You watch the Indy 500.
Mhm.
And we pulled the TV out to the porch because we lived on an old farmhouse. We pulled the TV through the window and we have it sitting on a table on the porch, and we're outside. The weather's nice, and we're watching Montoya and I believe Elio Castroneves trade the lead, like lap after lap after lap, with 10 laps to go, fighting for the win. I believe it was Castroneves. It might have been Will Power. It was one of his teammates, but the racing, number one, was incredible because it was that era of IndyCar where it was just the slipstream was really strong. I mean, 2015 was the same
Yeah.
year they had that crazy race at Fontana.
Yeah.
But
Well, and they were trading the lead every single lap.
every single
that
lap.
year.
Yeah. It was insane. I didn't know who was going to win, and to see Montoya, who I definitely had a little bit of respect for, because if you see someone who was decent in NASCAR, he won a few races, go to IndyCar and then win their biggest race, you got to be like, yeah, that's pretty cool. Like most
Yeah.
people can't even be good at one, right? And then 2019 is special for me because that was the first, or rather 2019 is I think what got me really hooked on IndyCar. And it's gotten to me where where I am today, wearing an IndyCar jersey. I have IndyCar merch, or my IndyCar little shrine down here.
Yeah.
Because I think it was the bump day drama with Alonso. and then just the quality of the racing. It was, watching Simon Pagenaud versus Alexander Rossi. And from that point on, I was watching every single IndyCar race from there on. Before that, I wasn't. I mean, I missed the start of the 2019 season. I wasn't really watching it. But from there on, I was paying attention. And
Yeah.
I mean, those are the three races that really stick out to me.
Nice.
Yeah.
For me, I also really like the 2015 one because, I mean, I was watching IndyCar, but I really had associated Juan Pablo Montoya as a NASCAR driver at that
Right.
point. And when he goes over there to IndyCar, it was just so cool seeing him really compete. I mean, he almost won an IndyCar championship as well in his tenure at
Mhm.
Penske and IndyCar. And it was just so cool. I was really rooting for him. That was such an amazing race, start to finish as well. And so that one's definitely up there for me. Another one I would say is also, I'm gonna have the same ones as you probably, 2011, because I was visiting Denver. We were on like a family trip in Denver, and I just remember watching that. Like I wasn't home, and I was watching the race on this tiny little TV that my aunt had at the time, and just watching that. I was rooting for J.R. Hildebrand because I knew that wasn't like a super big team or anything like that, and I knew it would have been just huge for him, obviously, as the Indy 500. But then devastatingly hit the wall last corner, and then I like Dan Weldon a lot. I'd seen him win in person at Kansas a few times. I'd been a big fan of his, as well as Scott Dixon's. Seeing him win that was really exciting as well. And you kind of alluded to it. He had just lost big rides. He didn't really have a proper full-time ride at the time. So ended up winning the 500 was huge. And then my third one would be last year when I went in person for the very first time. Magical experience all around. Got to see some amazing people from online and everything. But then walking up to my seats for the first time, and you're going to feel this too next week, Zach.
Mhm.
Get up to the seats for the first time. My breath was taken away. I'm like, I'm really here. I'm at Indianapolis Motor Speedway about to watch the Indy 500.
We didn't even
It,
talk about like the
ooh,
the actual track itself, the
yeah.
pagoda, the size, I mean the noise. Yeah,
Oh,
like
it's so much bigger in person. Like you're gonna be mind blown. But I get to my seat, I just could not believe that I was actually there. Then it starts, and of course, my guy was Joseph Newgarden, and he was climbing up through the field the entire day. I can remember that day like vividly, every single second of it. I probably will as long as I got my memory. Like it is bizarre how well I remember the whole day. He gets all the way up there. And I think like 50 to go, or maybe 100 to go. He took the lead for the first time, and I'm like losing my mind. After the red flags at the end, he does make that last lap pass on Marcus Ericsson to win it. It was just so special to be there, knowing that Joseph had been doing it for, I believe that was his 11th or 12th attempt. And to be there when my driver ends up winning was just so special. That's always going to be
yeah,
like one of my
I'm
top
jealous.
memories as a racing fan. And I mean, he might do it again, Zach. You never know. But
He might. I mean, they do look
that's
fast. So.
he does. And but yeah, that's definitely my favorite moment. Not even just at IMS, but like in my life in general. Like it's remarkable, that place. I
Yeah.
cannot wait to go back this weekend.
Yeah, and again, we're gonna have new probably favorite memories of the Speedway of the
Oh yeah.
Indianapolis 500 because we're going. I'm My favorite IndyCar driver is Joseph Newgarden. My favorite NASCAR driver is Kyle Larson, and they both look fast. I'm I don't know if I'm walking out of that speedway alive. It's gonna be an incredible day for me. I'm so excited. If you want to hear our thoughts on our trip, follow us here on YouTube to see our weekly podcast episodes about motorsports. We cover NASCAR, we cover IndyCar, a little bit of Formula One, and yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the month of May, and we will see you guys next time. Bye bye.
Bye.